Welcome to ReConnect with Plant Wisdom. I'm your host, Tigrila Gardenia, nature-inspired mentor and leadership coach. In this podcast, I share ancient and modern knowledge from biology to spirituality about the wondrous ways in which plants can help you lead a naturally conscious life. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 6. Woo! I'm going to keep cheering for a while because for me, this is still huge. Okay, so today we're talking about, remember we were talking last episode about stability and creation, these two sort of different sides of the coin that are connected to the next masterclass, which will be the April masterclass from the Plant Inspired Masterclass series in Blooming Sprouts in the Naturally Conscious community, which the title of the masterclass for April, and again, if you're listening to this or watching this after April, no worries. All of the recordings are available for you to as soon as you join the Blooming Sprouts. So this is a masterclass titled Creating from Stability and Stabilizing While Creating a Plants Model. Simple. So in the last episode, we talked about what exactly does stability and creation really mean. And today we're going to go a little farther into the perspective of what roles, if any, do perception, evolution, and preservation play in creating stability, but in also creating instability or creating that creation mechanism, which is really instability. I mean, in some ways, we're talking about creating from stability. So it's, pushing yourself to be unstable from a stable state, or stabilizing when you are already unstable. So these are other ways that you can look at this. And again, remember that we're going to be exploring these topics in depth because in the April Plant Inspired Masterclass, we're going to specifically talk about the model that plants use in order to move from these two states and really capitalize these two states as much as possible. So that's the place where we're going to talk really, really in depth about how plants use this in the ecosystem. But today, again, I want to talk about that difference between perception, evolution, and preservation. And you could almost think of it as perception is the precursor or the necessary elements in order to choose the path of evolution or the path of preservation. The reason why this is really important is because we have these expressions as humans that we use all the time, right? When I'm feeling unstable, I automatically assume that I need to stabilize, right? We hear this all the time from people. I'm feeling super unstable, and so therefore I want to stabilize my stuff. And stability has taken kind of the primary role of the prize. The prize is to become stable, to be balanced, to be in equilibrium, to be all blah, blah, blah. All of these areas around the idea of stability. And I get it. I mean, stability is good. Stability gives us a foundation. It gives us balance. It gives us the ability to kind of feel like you're in a safe space. All of these aspects that we talked about in our last episode. But from stability, you don't really grow, you maintain. Stability is a state of maintenance, which can be extremely useful. I mean, most of the time, we don't spend enough time in stability before we're off to create the next best thing. We don't really savor stability. I mean, stability can also be equated to being, right? I am exactly what I am in this present moment, and therefore I don't need to change. And from a plant's perspective, I mean, we see this all the time. Stability, and from a macro level, how many plants do we see that have been pretty much the same since, I don't know, 400 million years ago? I mean, there are those plants that have grown in the almost exact same way since the very beginning of time. And that is a great area of stability. That being said, it's very rare that they're 100% the same. The reason for this is because you have to you have to adapt to the constantly changing environment around you. The conditions in which you live, in the case of a plant, but also of a human, are very rarely the same conditions. So adaptability requires you to be able to understand the slight difference between when am I supposed to evolve and when am I supposed to stabilize? And these are actually sometimes actually, I would say oftentimes confused. We invert, or better yet, we don't even take into consideration some of them. Let me explain myself a little bit better. I'll give you an example that's really really weird. But recently, we've had a whole series of earthquakes, and we hear of a lot of what we call natural disasters happening in the world, right? So, our ability when a building, for example, falls due to some kind of disaster, whatever that might be, we tend to think about ourselves as like creating stability, creating a stable base again, rebuilding that kind of building. But in reality, we know that if it fell because of some kind of event like an earthquake or something else, that in reality we need to evolve that building. We can't just build the same building that was there, because we already know that that kind of earthquake is part of the conditions. Now we better understand that that kind of earthquake, I'm using an earthquake because it's an easy example, that kind of earthquake is going to hit that area at some point. If we build the exact same type of building, the building will crumble again. So we need to evolve the building. We need to move out of the stability of the foundation that that building was in and build something that has some form of innovation in it. So that's a kind of obvious example and simple example, but it's a lot harder to understand when we're talking about ourselves, right? If I'm feeling very unstable, I feel like I am in a state where, I don't know, in my work, I go to work every day, and in my work, I'm feeling very triggered. I'm feeling very unstable. I'm feeling very emotional. I don't feel like I have a strong foundation around me, all these types of things. How do you determine whether or not the course of action that you should take is to stabilize or to evolve? Do you create, or do you look for balance? This is where the perception piece comes along, right? Part of what we're looking to do is so understand the current state in which we are in, to understand what is the world in which we live, the environment. So when you look at it from a plant perspective, we're looking at how aware am I of my overall environment, and more importantly, my relationship to that environment. When I understand, without any kind of judgment, without saying this is good or this is bad, my boss says something to me and I'm triggered immediately to be either angry or hurt or sad. When something goes wrong in the way that I'm creating something at work, right? I'm doing a job and I get feedback on it. If the feedback is not a specific thing, I am immediately triggered of some sort, or I am feeling bad, or I don't even believe that I'm capable of getting good results, right? So a limiting belief is a really great example of something where the perception of understanding where does that limiting belief really come from, and more importantly than where it comes from, what is its true function? But by assuming that the function is always negative because today it affects me negatively, I am not really perceiving my environment for the environment in which it is. Therefore, I'm not going to make good decisions on whether or not I'm supposed to stabilize, or instead am I supposed to create instability and move things around. So, and to be honest, this kind of situation that I'm talking about doesn't just happen from the quote unquote negative side, or from the side of me feeling unstable. I could be in a job, using the job example because it's kind of easy. I could be in a job where I seem super happy, right? I'm extremely happy. I am loving my job. I'm getting, good performance reviews. I'm doing a really great perspective. So I could think that I'm supposed to stay in what that is. The problem is my environment around me is not going to stay that way forever. In other words, technology morphs, situations change, societal norms differ, and all kinds of different things. So even though I am stable today, if I'm not really aware of my environment, I could very easily become stagnant or stuck where balance and stability is happening, but I am no longer growing or adapting. So this is where that perception is extremely important. It's very important for us to take a look at who we are and where we are, or whatever given situation that you want to work with, whether it's a project, whether it's a personal development, whether it's my family life, whether it's my relationships with others. It doesn't really matter what it's looking at. But the first step in the understanding of how to play this game between stability and instability, between creation and balance, between chaos and instead structure. In order for me to understand how to play this game, my most important thing to do is understand my own environment. Again, and my reactions to those environments and who I am in relation to whatever it is that I'm looking at, so that I can much more I don't want to say acutely, although that is really a good term for this, but more of subtly. I can more subtly understand the differences, and therefore I can see when differences happen. If in reality, what I'm supposed to do is preserve the status quo. In other words, something is changing around me, and what is most important for me to do in reality for that thing that is changing is to preserve. Or am I supposed to instead be evolving? In other words, I need to find something that's completely new and innovative. And sometimes it's going to be a combination, and that's what we were talking about, creating while you're stable, or where you're stabilizing while you're creative, right? This game between these two states, and which in reality create two new states in and of themselves. So you have the pure creation state or chaos state, you have the pure stabilized state or the preservation state, and you actually have these two in between stages where you are moving from one into the other or moving from the other into the one, right? So these are actually four states that give you a lot of flexibility in order to experiment and move and switch. So when we don't think of ourselves as I'm supposed to either be in complete creation chaos mode or I'm supposed to be in complete stabilization mode, but instead I realize that there's a fluidity in there, then I can play around with not just the whole project or development or attitude or whatever, but I can instead go in and narrow in on certain details while keeping some stable and while keeping others in flux all the time. But the only way that you can do this, the only way that you can reach that level of refinement is through the enhancement of your own perceptions. The more you are able to perceive the world around you in whatever way that might be, physical perception, emotional perception, spiritual or subtle perspective, the more you're able to perceive without expectations, judgments, or conditioning. Remember our first episodes, we talked a lot about conditioning. True perception requires me to release conditioning because conditioning limits what I perceive. It holds me back from what I'm actually perceiving. So, in order for me to be able to evaluate how to adapt to a changing condition, whether that's by evolution or whether that's by preservation, or whether that's somewhere in the middle where some parts evolve while other parts preserve and vice versa, then I have to be able to give myself permission to perceive at the widest possible levels, expanding out all of my perceptions without conditionings or any kind of filter that decides this is good, this is bad, this is right, this is wrong. None of that actually matters. The only thing that matters is it relevant and necessary in the current condition? And can I predict where the conditions are moving towards and adapt with it? I'm going to give you an example of this that could be really useful to you to think about. When we think about what's changing in the world, the climate change, all the situations, everything that we're reading about and learning about and seeing that's happening in the world. For a second, what would change in the way you approach the world if you were to ask all of this talk about climate change, all of the talk about what's been changing in the way that our planet reacts, temperature, natural disasters, quote unquote, all those types of things. If you were to ask yourself a different question for a second, which is the question around how can I adapt to this changing condition? Where is it that I, as an individual, or I, as a society, need to evolve in order to match the evolutionary changes that are happening in the planet? And when am I supposed to preserve? This can go when we talk about species development, for example, any kind of plant or animal that today maybe is going extinct. Is that extinction in reality an evolution in order for the species to develop new traits that are better adapted to the changing condition, or to give space to species that are more adapted to the changing conditions? And therefore, I shouldn't be preserving them, because then I'm going to be preserving them in an environment they can no longer thrive in. And just for a second, I'm just going to put a little caveat around this, because I know some people might say, oh, but we shouldn't lose any species. It's not true. We've lost species all around the world for millennia, right? That's what happens. Species die and move out. Sometimes when that species becomes adapted to the environment again, the species actually comes back, believe it or not. We've had certain species that we've lost and in reality have naturally evolved again in other places where the conditions are more like the original conditions that are happening. I am not saying that this is what should happen all the time, but I'm just putting it into your mind that it is, that there might be other solutions. And when we talk about creating from stability and stabilizing creation, what we're talking about is really looking at this and being able to step back from our conditioning, to be able to step back from our own preconceived notions, to perceive and to make conscious choices of when I should really move forward and evolve, when instead I should preserve, and what are the states in between that allow me to move between these two in differing models in order for me to stay always resilient and in an environment that I can thrive in. Okay. So I hope that was clear. We're going to talk about the hows. We're going to talk about what it is that you need to do, or what you can learn from plants in order to best move through this model in the next Plant Inspired Masterclass, which happens the second Tuesday of every month in the Blooming Sprouts in the Naturally Conscious community. I really look forward to talking with you about this. And please, you can send me questions or comments. I really want to hear what it is that you are thinking about when you hear this kind of expression, because this is really how we're going to evolve together. This is how we are going to expand our perceptions, when we share our stories and tell each other of what it is that we're thinking. So in the Naturally Conscious community, or wherever it is that you're watching or listening to this, please make sure that you subscribe, that you rate, that you share, and that you also leave me a comment and let me know what you think about this. All right. We will talk in the next episode, where we're going to go even deeper into this concept of creating from stability and stabilizing while creating. And we're going to look at a little bit more the concept of instability, because I think that that's the one that creates the most amount of confusion of people, because you have this tendency to want to stabilize a little bit too early. All right, we'll talk soon. Bye.